Um, I'd like to do something very obvious. I'd like to thank you all profoundly for being here today. And I'd like to say that I think it's a testimony to your raised awareness, if you want to put it like that, or your commitment to hearing. And in some respects, the purpose for today was to arrive at an outcome where you were clear that this is a complex matter, that we cannot suddenly rush to law, and that the evidence that we have gathered researching this deeply over many years, for us, categorically proves that to introduce legislation to permit assisted suicide and euthanasia is catastrophic. Not just for individuals who die, not just for their families, not just for the societies in which they live locally, but the countries in which they live and globally. And I think it would be hard to deny, with the range of wonderful speakers that we've had from across the world today, that this is not a global issue. It is a global issue. That you may feel now, I hope, that it's a complex issue and you need to think again. That's what I want. We have lots of resources to help you engage in thinking about it. That you may also feel that there is an urgency here, which you may not have felt before. This is not just happening in Ireland. This is happening in very many jurisdictions, and the consequences of taking disabled people's lives in particular, it's a specific example I know, but taking those lives as not worth living, that attitudinal response to disabled people and the lives that we lead, feeds across a much wider population. My mother would never have described herself as disabled, but she was severely impaired by the end of her life. And she faced many of the mobility issues, and she faced some of the discrimination that I'd faced as a younger man, as a disabled younger man, and continue to do, as Amy has been pointing out. So let's be clear, this is not, and I don't want you to go away with the idea that this is any kind of special pleading on behalf of disabled people. It is not. If it's anything, it's to refer back to yourselves to understand that the dangers to us in the front line mean that you're coming up in the middle and the rear. And that's a solid truth. I can impress that upon you, but I think you will be more convinced if you continue to do some research around this. As I said, I would just direct you to our websites as a starting point. There is a wealth of material, academic, non-academic, some of it polemic, but in all honesty, if you can't get angry about this stuff sometimes, I really don't know what there is to get angry about. So, again, let me just say a huge thank you for coming to this inaugural conference of Hope Ireland. And you know that when I say inaugural, it's because, of course, we are starting something today that I hope will be a movement, in inverted commas. I'm always a bit wary about using that word because I don't think movements are homogeneous wholes. I think what we do is we bring our individual and our collective experience and expertise to the subject. But when you come in the door, we have a principle. Whatever your issues are that are not related to this one, you leave them at the door, please. It's just more honest, because we cannot deliver on everything, practically speaking, anyway. But because we know that to be effective, we have to be single-focused. It's the only way, experience dictates, it's the only way we're ever going to succeed, if we're going to succeed at all. And I'm not going to be pessimistic about it, because I think we can. I wouldn't be doing this either if I did not believe that change is possible, real change is possible. And if I didn't believe that the fundamental bedrock of that change is people's genuine human decency. I'm not going to be cynical and trade on your decency, but what I'm going to say is that I think the vast majority of people are decent. the vast majority of people who are decent, who get drawn into the idea that killing someone is a compassionate act, change their minds. I'm not going to take too much of your time, but I do want to just sort of round a couple of things off. It's going to be an integral part of my task to demonstrate clearly why disabled people are in the front line of this tide, because it's not something that people accept or hear or see easily. And it's part and parcel of that kind of invisibility that goes with being disabled. There are lots of non-disabled people who just don't get it. They don't see us. They don't want to. Why? Because they have what I would say is a perfectly ordinary human reaction to us sometimes. I would even call it a visceral reaction, a gut reaction. They allow their fear of being like us to take over. They allow that fear to get in the way of any real deep thinking. They allow that fear to play into their ignorance of who we are and what our disabled lives look like. And then, and this is the bit that I think is really important, they behave in ways as a result. And those ways are the root of the discrimination that I'm talking about, even to death. So, what I wanted for you today was to be able to sit here and say, can you pause? Have you heard enough? Have you heard enough evidence now that you will pause, take a step back, and say, regardless of where you were when you came back, when you came in this morning, will you pause and say, this is serious, we cannot just do it? Can you understand, how patronizing that phrase. You can understand very easily, I'm certain, that, well, I don't believe we can ever legislate for pure compassion in any act, in any human act. Human beings are a complex of emotions, motivations, intentions, exhaustion, cynicism, and a whole range of other things, including watching a loved one suffer and feeling that it's horrific and that it's needless. What, of course, we know is that research proves that someone, for example, post-operatively, after major surgery, who says they want to die, change their minds afterwards. Given time, given the right level of care, given the right support, the worst of it, if you will, the feeling that they must give up now, goes away. And that's true of most people. What I will not deny is that some people arrive to seriously consider that suicide is the only option for them. That would be stupid, because there are obviously enough people who do that. What I will say is, we do not focus on suicide. We don't say anything about the impact. We don't even say anything about the impact of our discourse about assisted suicide on the families of people who have lost a family member through suicide. And I think there's a whole raft of issues that we haven't even begun to discuss today, which are important in this context. But what I want to be clear about is that compassion can never be pure. When people talk about safeguards, they talk about, in this case, in this small number of cases, we can do it for them. The legislation will be so tight, there will be no mistakes. Excuse me? Going into hospital is one of the most dangerous things you can do. And that's medical research. People do harm in hospitals. They don't intend to. Good doctors do harm on operating theatre tables. They don't mean to. But you are more at risk of cross-infection in hospital than you are sitting here today. So let's be clear about it. Medical intervention brings with it risk. So we have to be careful not to suddenly assume that the only place we need to be is in a hospital bed with a doctor and nurse at our side. I want to give you just a couple of examples, and I'll not give you them all, but look, let me give you one. I don't know if any of you have heard of Simon Fitzmaurice. Yes? Simon Fitzmaurice had motor neuron disease. As a result of pneumonia, an infection, his life was threatened. So he was in hospital in Cork on a ventilator. He wanted to go home to his wife and his 3 children. The only way he could do that was with a ventilator. So I'll tell you the salient fact now, although this turned out to be the case later, we understood later. The HSE in Ireland had no policy of supporting any patient going home on a ventilator. They said, we can't afford it. It was a cost issue, okay? So that hadn't been made clear. But imagine now, you're lying in a hospital bed, your life is threatened, you're in deep distress, you're on a ventilator, which is no fun, and a doctor you've never met before comes beside your bed and says, wait for it, his wife and his mum are sitting by the bed. And this doctor, a total stranger, comes to him and says, Simon, it's time to make the hard decision. That's Ireland, that's Cork, and that was about, I can't remember now, but maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago. This happens. This is already happening. And I'm just giving you one example, just to prove the case. But look, let me just nail for the last time the idea that just in case there is any doubt in your mind about this as a disability discrimination issue. Paul and I go to the doctor. Yeah, he needs it more than I do, but anyway, Paul and I go to the doctor, and Paul sits in front of his doctor and says, I want to die, I want to commit suicide. And the doctor says, Paul, what are you talking about? You have a lovely wife, beautiful kids, lovely home. Life is tough in the crisis, but isn't it for all of us? What are you talking about? We need to help you, don't we? What do we need to do for you? Talk to you? Talk it through with you? Maybe give you some medication to lift your mood so that you can get out of this cycle, which is leaving you feeling suicidal? Or, in worst case, I'm not sure about it, it exists in Australia, but I imagine it does. Worst case scenario, 2 people turn up and take Paul into what we would call section. They would section him under the Mental Health Act. No choice. 28 days in a psychiatric unit because he's a danger to himself. I go to the doctor, and I'm repeating myself, I know, but I want to make the point clearly. I go to the doctor, and the doctor says, sure, we understand. Look at what you've done. Look at what you're going through. Look at what you're going to have to go through. This is never going to get better. We understand. I understand. And he thinks, or she thinks, this is a compassionate response. The compassion is to kill me, to end my suffering. That is simply and solely and only based on my disability. That's a reaction to disability, my disability, and that's the epitome of discrimination. Treating someone differently, in this case very much less favorably, even to the point of death, simply and only because of a reason of disability. Okay? So, and the great danger and the great sadness in so many ways is that these are decent people sometimes sitting there saying, let me help you, let me help you, let me help you. And they say, we've got a case of a young man who, well, he was 12 at the time, in a Southampton hospital. And his doctors, because he had multiple complex needs, he couldn't communicate his own wishes. He was in the same situation with pneumonia, which was life-threatening for him at 12 years old. His doctors decided to kill him. They decided to lift the levels of morphine to allow him to die with dignity. They didn't tell the family. When the family found out, they went together into the hospital, ripped out the morphine drip out of his arm, and rescued him. There was a fist fight on the ward. Who went to prison? David's uncle and his cousin for saving his life. We talked about saving lives, promoting hope. Where is the hope in this? Because the thing that really galls me is that those doctors were outraged. They were absolutely outraged that anyone could not allow poor David to die. Unbelievable arrogance and attitudinal response to a disabled young man. And the thing that they forgot, David's family and his mum, Carol, took their case to the European Court of Human Rights. And do you know what impressed me most about what she said? David's a lovely boy. He never tries to get sweets for no reason. He's happy, he's smiling. He doesn't have a bad thought in his head. And what those doctors forgot in that ward, in their arrogance, was that David was loved. David is loved. David is part of a family. And no matter what they think, no matter how callous or cynical they feel no matter how callous or cynical their approach was to David, the fact is they forgot what was in front of them was a human being. Now, not all doctors are like that. Listen, this is not about doctor bashing, please. I have experienced over 42 years some of the most incredible medical, nursing, even social care and human support. So please don't ever think I'm just banging on about doctors. I'm not. What I'm trying to do is paint a picture, and that picture shows you that over and over and over again, these aspects come. And what they do is, when these aspects come, it's like painting by numbers. And you put another number in, and suddenly you've got a picture. And that picture is incredibly dangerous for us. And I thank you all, seriously, profoundly, for coming here today. Thank you very much indeed.